Hello and a very pleasant good evening to you wherever you may be. This is the From the Bench podcast. I'm your host, Mark Janish. This is a sports podcast associated with AccessMediaGlobal.com. You're welcome to go to my site. I own it. All the content is mine and choices of my own in the sense that it's sent there to entertain you, keep you busy, various podcasts, various articles, game analysis, and so forth. This is the flagship podcast program related to AccessMediaGlobal.com. I've been doing this for 7 years now, and happy to have you along on this edition of the podcast. You're welcome to get a hold of me on Twitter. Mark Janish, MarkJanisch, at capital M, Mark, ARK, Access Media. You're welcome to get a hold of me there. You're welcome to listen on Libsyn and Stitcher Radio. This podcast will be up shortly on both of those platforms, so we hope you enjoy the commentary, analysis, and scores. That's generally what I'm here to do on a nightly basis, essentially because I'm on the west coast of the United States near Santa Barbara, California, just outside Santa Barbara down the 101 freeway in the Carpinteria Valley. And being on the west coast, we have the advantage necessarily of receiving late game scores that those on the eastern time zone in the United States and the central time zone specific to the United States don't necessarily get those finals available. But I'm going to do my best to give you as much information as possible, some analysis, and hopefully we'll have some fun and we'll enjoy being together and just interacting regarding the world of sports. You can also go to my site at accessmediaglobal.com, hit the contact page, leave a note for me. I'll be getting that on the platform very soon. Happy to respond. I'm also on YouTube. Now, YouTube right now, I haven't done a video in a little bit, but this is a rebranded podcast. What I hope to do with YouTube is just give you a couple of topics per night. Last night's podcast was an example of that. I discussed two topics: the suddenly slumping National League West leading Los Angeles Dodgers and Ezekiel Elliott's suspension, and why I think that the NFL got this one wrong, along with the Ray Rice incident. So 2 of the last 3 years, we've been in court rather than discussing football. But tonight, being game 1 of 256 games on the NFL schedule, we're going to discuss some football, whether the situation dictates it or not. I'm also going to share with you my picks for the weekend, both college and pro, obviously excluding tonight's game. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some scores, some MLB scores. It's a light night on Thursday, usually getaway day for most teams, and a day off for many teams. 180 days, 26 weeks, 18 days off throughout the Major League Baseball season. It does get to be a grind, and now that we're into September, the heat of pennant races are definitely showing themselves. Tonight, the New York Yankees beat the Baltimore Orioles 9-1. In another game, Washington 4, Philadelphia 3. That's a final. The world champion Chicago Cubs making a nice run in the National League Central, leading that division. Chicago Cubs 8, the Pittsburgh Pirates 2. That's a final. The New York Mets 7, and the Cincinnati Reds 2. That is also a final. Atlanta 6, Miami 5. Cleveland 11, the Chicago White Sox 2. That's a final. Now, Cleveland's won 14 in a row. They're right up there with the Arizona Diamondbacks, who won 13 in a row. One of the games of the evening, Minnesota front runners in the American League wild card race. They beat Kansas City on a come-from-behind fashion. 4-2 was the final. The St. Louis Cardinals, who were fighting for that spot in the National League wild card, the second wild card currently held by the struggling Colorado Rockies. San Diego beat St. Louis tonight 3-0. That's a final. The Los Angeles Dodgers, we addressed them last night. They look to be going down to their 12th loss in the last 13 games. Colorado 9. The Los Angeles Dodgers 1. That's in the bottom of the 7th inning. Want to also go ahead and just give you some more information and good scores tonight. Wanted to go ahead and just emphasize this. As far as the U.S. Open in New York, Arthur Ashe Stadium, 4 American women made the semifinals, and I have a couple of match scores for you in that respect. And Sloane Stephens, up-and-coming star that may be replacing the Williams sisters one day, as far as cachet and notoriety and ability. I believe Sloane Stephens, last I heard, this 83rd in the world. She's made a great strides in the last year or so, getting that ranking up. Sloane Stephens beat Venus Williams tonight. 6-1, 6-love, and the final set 7-5. In the other semifinal, Madison Keys beat Coco Vandeweghe 6-1, 6-2 in New York. So we'll see. This is the first time we've had 4 women in the semifinals of the U.S. Open on the women's side since 1981. A long time ago. Those were grade school days for me as a freshman at Carpinteria High School just down the road from me on Foothill Road. But anyway, wanted to share those things with you tonight. Believe that's all I have regarding that circumstance. But we're definitely going to continue to roll tonight into some football picks. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and give you the tonight's stats. I have a full stats of Kansas City, New England, Game 1, the defending champion New England Patriots, playing the Kansas City Chiefs out of the AFC West. I would definitely say that New England got outplayed by some of the key position performers by the Kansas City Chiefs. Alex Smith probably had one of the best games of his career tonight. And that should tell you a lot if you remember how he performed or underperformed in certain aspects with the San Francisco Giants. Final score was 42-27. Alex Smith, 28 completions in 35 attempts, 368 yards, 4 touchdowns. The 40-year-old Tom Brady looked every bit of that 40 years old. 16 of 36, 267 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. So a very pedestrian performance by the New England Patriots' Tom Brady. Other notable statistics, Kareem Hunt out of, I believe he's Toledo. He had 246 all-purpose yards. He had 17 carries for 148 yards and a touchdown on the rushing side. His longest run of the night was 58 yards. On the plus side for the Patriots, Gillislee, acquired by the Patriots from the Bills, I believe. He had 45 yards, 15 carries, 45 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Otherwise, nothing of note necessarily regarding the rushing effort by the New England Patriots. Boy, are they wishing they had LeGarrette Blount with some administering some blunt force trauma in the backfield. Maybe they could even take the Danny Woodhead of about 5 years ago. But anyway, moving on, just going over some statistics here. I do have the full game stats, so bear with me as I walk through the circumstance and situation with the statistics tonight. Tyreek Hill went off with a cramp in his hip. 7 receptions, 133 yards, and a 75-yard touchdown for Tyreek Hill on the receiving end. Kareem Hunt, who had 246 all-purpose yards. I mentioned the fact that he had 148 rushing yards and a touchdown. On the receiving side, he was 5 receptions, 98 yards, and 2 touchdowns for 3 touchdowns on the night. His longest, as far as that goes, receiving was a 78-yard touchdown catch. So he redeemed himself after fumbling his first carry as a pro. He never fumbled at the University of Toledo, but carry number 1 in the NFL, he got stripped, but definitely took the time to redeem himself. Very happy with that. Leading receiver for the Patriots was Danny Amendola, 6 receptions, 100 yards. His longest was 27 yards. Brandon Cooks, acquired by the Patriots from the New Orleans Saints, had a 54-yard long catch, 3 receptions, 88 yards. Rob Gronkowski, Gronk, 2 receptions, 33 yards. His longest was 17. And James White, 3 receptions, 30 yards. His longest was 26. What can I say? The Thursday night version of football doesn't necessarily appeal to me all that much, but the general gist of this is that Tom Brady and crew definitely got off to a poor start. Just wanted to go through real quickly here any stats that really stuck out. Third down efficiency, 4 of 11 for 36%. Net rushing yards for the Patriots, 185. I said 28 of 35 for Alex Smith. Average gain per pass, including sacks, was 9.3. 6 punts for an average of 43.7. No blocked field goals. Want to get to penalties. 15 penalties for 139 yards for the Patriots. And we had 6 penalties for 55 yards for the New England Patriots. So we'll have to see what adjustments are made going into next week for the New England Patriots. Wanted to just congratulate Andy Reid. In this case, did a great job despite some early missteps in the first quarter and a half. Great job to stay in the game with some key defensive plays, keeping the score down, and keeping Tom Brady off the field. And, of course, Alex Smith, 28 of 35 for one more time, 28 of 35, 368 yards, and 4 touchdowns, basically the game of his life. Right now, I'm going to turn my attention for the final segment of the program to my picks. This is put together by Grace Note, the latest line. Wanted to go ahead and just give you some college picks here, starting out with some Friday NCAA football. Central Florida is favored by 3.5. The over/under against Memphis, who will play UCLA, I believe, next week. 68.5. We have Memphis underdog by 3.5. The over/under is 68.5. I would go ahead and take Memphis in this one. Purdue and Ohio at Purdue. Purdue favored by 4, opening currently at 3.5 points. The over/under is 57. Go ahead and take Purdue and the over 57 is the over-under currently. Oklahoma State favored by 28.5. They opened at 26.5. At South Alabama, take Oklahoma State in this process, and the over at 66.5 points a game. South Florida, 17.5. They are favored over Connecticut. Currently at 17. The over-under is 67. And all these games, South Florida at Connecticut and going forward, are on Saturday. I gave you the 3 on Friday. Go ahead and take South Florida and the under. Could be a very wet South Florida due to Hurricane Irma. Also, look for time changes or cancellations in your area. Of course, we're hoping and praying that the people of Houston and the people of Florida get out the way of a monster storm. Anticipated winds of at least 185 miles an hour. So do your best to prepare. Look to what your local officials and local state government is telling you. And despite the fact that people don't want to leave their comfort zone, they believe they can be strong and get through hurricanes such as this. We'd like to minimize the loss of life. So if you're listening to this podcast right now, do what you can. Get everything together. Get your emergency supplies and all those things ready. And look to your local authorities. Watch your weather. And get out the way of Hurricane Irma. Category 4 to 5. I believe 185 miles an hour is a 5 on the hurricane scale. So do your best that away if you can. Moving on with the picks, we have the favored Northwestern. Started out at 3, still at 355. Go ahead and take Northwestern and the points. The over-under is 55. Favored Michigan is favored at home over Cincinnati. Right now, the Wolverines are favored by 34. The over-under is 48.5. Go ahead and take the over, as Jim Harbaugh should be going to a relatively easy win at Cincinnati. But then again, no win is easy in college football. Kevin Sumlin can attest to that at Texas A&M. Baylor can attest to that during their spate with Liberty. And, of course, who can forget the win by Howard University. Moving on, at Wisconsin, favored. Line started at 31. The line has moved to 31.5. 57.5 is the over-under. Florida Atlantic. I believe Florida Atlantic is coached by Lane Kiffin, late of Ohio State. Late of Alabama, late of USC. 57.5 is the over-under. Take Wisconsin and the over at 57.5. At Florida State, the line is 33.5. The over-under is 53. I think this game may have been canceled or moved, so please check your local sports affiliates, regional sports networks, your local news on this. But at this point, if this game was going to be played, I'd be taking Florida State and the over. Over-under one more time is 53. The Louisville Cardinal, the line has moved to 1.5. Underdog at North Carolina. North Carolina is the underdog. Louisville is the favorite. 62.5. I probably take the under and the points in this particular case. Iowa, 2.5-point favorites at Iowa State. Regional rivalry here. 48 is the over-under. I probably take the over and Iowa State to win at home. At Kansas State, they're favored over Charlotte. 36 was the opening. They're at 35.5. That line is moved by half a point. The over-under is 57.5. Underdog is Charlotte. I go ahead and I take Kansas State at home and the under at 57.5. Favored of the West Virginia University, I believe the Mountaineers. The line is still 24. Underdog East Carolina. Take West Virginia and the over at 66.5. Army, 16.5 point favorites, 51.5 point. 51.5 is the over-under, I should say. The underdog is Buffalo. Go ahead and take West Virginia at home and the over. I'm sorry. Go ahead and take Army to win this one. I probably take the over combined points at 51.5. Wake Forest is favored by 2. This is a pick'em game, so that's at Boston College, the Golden Eagle of Boston College. 46.5 is the over/under. Pick'em, folks. But if I'm in a situation, I take the home team and the over at 46.5. At Colorado, Colorado was favored with underdog Texas State. 35 was the point spread as far as the numbers. Still 35. The over-under is 57.5. Take the over in Colorado versus Texas State. At Ball State, they're favored. The line has moved to favor Ball State by 14, opened at 13. The over-under against Alabama Birmingham is 54.5. Go ahead and take the over at 54.5, and Ball State should carry the day in that game because it is a home game. Michigan State, the Spartans, 49.5 is the over/under against Western Michigan, who had a great game against USC for about 3 quarters until Ronald Jones went wild and scored a late touchdown. I believe also saw a portion of this game. I believe there was an interception return for a touchdown, if I'm not correct here. So at Michigan State favored by 7 over Western Michigan. This might be an upset, but I go ahead and take the Michigan State Spartans and the over at 49.5. The Penn State Nittany Lions favored by 21 now. Started at 19.5. Opening 21 is the line right now. 66 points is the over-under, and that's against Pittsburgh. Penn State and Pittsburgh on the campus of Penn State. I take the over at 66, and I take Penn State if I'm a betting man in Las Vegas. Rutgers University coming off a loss to the University of Washington, 30-14. Rutgers is now a 5.5 point favorite against Eastern Michigan. 51.5 is the over-under. I probably go ahead and take the over at 51.5 and choose Rutgers in this case. That they'll be looking for to punch somebody because they got punched themselves by the University of Washington out of the Pac-12 last week. Indiana favored at Virginia, underdog. This is a little bit suspect, I think. This might be a trap game as far as picking goes. Indiana gave Ohio State all they wanted in week 1. The opening line was 3.5. It's moved to 3. The over-under is 56. So at Virginia, go ahead and take the over, and I'd probably go ahead and take Virginia just because it's a home game for them. Old Dominion opened at 2, moved to 3.5. The over-under at 61, and they're at Massachusetts. So UMass and Old Dominion, I go ahead and take the under in this game. I take UMass only because it's a home game. Well, the Crimson Tide of Alabama. We all know about them and Nick Saban and the machinery that works out of the best team in the SEC, and many believe the best team in college football for the last several years, and they would have a great argument. They are going to be playing Fresno State at home. The Fresno State Red Wave, they travel well, ladies and gentlemen, so you're going to see a lot of red in the stands at Alabama as far as the Red Wave of Fresno State go. 42 points was the open. It's moved to 44. 53 is the over-under. Unfortunately, because this is a home game for the Crimson Tide of Alabama, I go ahead and I take the over and Alabama. I don't know. I'm not necessarily going to tell you to take the 42 to 44 points. It's 44 now. That's a little bit iffy as far as that goes. But if I'm a betting man, I definitely bet Bama at home and the over under being 53. Texas Christian University favored by 2 at Arkansas. It's moved actually to 3 as of today. So 58.5 is the over-under at Arkansas. I go ahead and take Arkansas in this game, and I probably take the over at 58.5. So Arkansas and the over versus Texas Christian. The Kevin Sumlin, the Texas Longhorns and the San Jose State Spartans. I'm sorry, I read that wrong. At Texas, the Aggies will be facing the San Jose State Spartans. This game was over under 64.5, opened at 28, has been reduced by 1.5 to 26.5. I go ahead and I take Texas at home. I don't know that I take the 28. I take definitely the over 64.5. At Navy, they're favored against Tulane. And I would go ahead and take the over. The over-under being 47. As far as the 13-point spread, it hasn't moved in the last few minutes, in the last few days anyway. So the 13-point favorites, I don't know if I messed with the points here, but I definitely take Navy at home, probably the under. If I had a choice to make, I probably would take the under because Navy isn't known as a real passing team. They run the read option well, 2 to 3 back offense back there. Haven't really changed much over the years, just based on the type of athletes, and we all understand that the quality of athlete is basically secondary to the 4-year military commitment that these gentlemen and ladies do make. So we definitely want to go ahead and have Navy be taken as the favorite, and they are by 13 points over Tulane. Kansas and Central Michigan. This game is at Kansas. The line has moved a 1.5. It's now 5. It started out at 3.5. I take the Kansas Jayhawks. I probably take the over on this. Central Michigan was a great team. They had a great year last year. Made a bowl game that whose name escapes me right now. But I'd go ahead and take the Kansas Jayhawks and the over versus underdog Central Michigan. The next game we're going to look at is at Tulsa, 15.5 points. Open 14, now 59.5. Is the over-under. University of Louisiana, Lafayette. I go ahead and I take the Tulsa, I believe, no pun intended, the Tulsa Hurricane, the Golden Hurricane of Tulsa. I probably go ahead and take them just because it's a home game. As far as the over-under, I probably go a little bit over the 59.5. This game, the next game we're going to look at is at Oregon. Autzen Stadium is a tough place to play. The Nebraska Cornhuskers play the Oregon Ducks. The line has moved by 4 points. Oregon is favored by 14. 69.5 is the over-under. I probably take the over on the 69.5 if I'm betting in Las Vegas. And 14 is about right. So I would expect the Oregon Ducks in the Willie Taggart era to be going 2-0 after last week's slaughter of Southern Utah, 77-21. That was on the Pac-12 network. For those of you that do receive the Pac-12 network on the West Coast and into Arizona and into Utah and Colorado, check your local listings on the national network or your local channel for more information. That should be an interesting game. I believe that game is on either Fox Sports 1 or Fox itself. I'm hoping to get the TV listings for Week 2 out of all Power 5 conferences. Of course, the SEC, the ACC, the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the Big 10. Hopefully you have that posted. I posted that last week, and hopefully that was helpful to you. You can go to accessmediaglobal.com. You can contact me, Mark Janish, via the contact listing. You can also go on Twitter, capital M-A-R-K, at Access Media. Mark Janish is my first and last name. You can find me by typing it in to the Twitter search bar, and hopefully you'll be able to continue to enjoy the journey as we just discuss things like we're discussing now, Week 2 in college football. Moving on, the suddenly relevant, potentially UCLA Bruins, after their 45-44 victory over Kevin Sumlin in Texas A&M, they are going to face Hawaii. This is at the Rose Bowl. The point spread is now 23.5. 60 points is the over-under. I'd probably go with the over on this case, and 23 seems like a lot as far as the Rose Bowl, because basically, to be honest with you, UCLA has not had a running game in quite some time, and maybe that's why Josh Rosen, even though he did spectacular as far as the comeback goes, that's maybe why he was 35 of 59 for 491 yards and 4 touchdowns, because if UCLA is even close to running the ball well, they dominate Texas A&M and any other opponent very well. But they don't have a running game, so Jim Mora will have to work on that. At North Carolina State, Marshall. The line is 24.5 now, was 23. The over-under 55. I go ahead and take Marshall to win the game. Take the under 55. At Southern Methodist University, North Texas. Regional rivalry. Southern Methodist University in Dallas. North Texas up the road as well. The line started at 12.5, increased to 13. I take SMU and the over at 64.5. The Clemson Tigers, the defending national champions. Their line, they're going to be playing Auburn this week. And that line is moved by 1.5. It started out at 6.5, went to 5. The over-under is 54. I go ahead and I take Clemson and the over at 54. At Missouri, this line has stayed consistent at 2.5. Over-under 73.5. Underdog South Carolina. Go ahead and take Missouri in that game, and I probably take the under at that point. Toledo at Nevada, the Wolfpack. This game has moved point-wise from 9 to 9.5. The over-under is 70, and because it's at Nevada, we'll give the Wolfpack the benefit of the doubt and choose them this week. I'd probably go ahead and take the over. The Ohio State University playing Oklahoma. The line is 7.5 and continues to be that going into today's printing here and podcasting. 65 is the over-under. I'd probably go ahead and take Ohio State and the over in this case, even though they didn't necessarily have what I would consider a great game for 3 quarters. against the Indiana Hoosiers, who I mentioned earlier. Mississippi State at Louisiana Tech. The line is moved by 1.5. The over-under is 69 at Louisiana Tech. I probably take Louisiana Tech. Not sure about the over-under. I'll just take a guess here, and I'll take the under 69. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish and the Georgia Bulldogs out of the SEC. Georgia's an underdog just because it's just because it's a home game for Notre Dame. What I started to say, the line started at 6.5 when this game came out. It's actually moved to 4 with Notre Dame being favored. Go ahead and take Notre Dame and the over-under. I probably take the over at 57.5. 57.5. I think Georgia's going to score more points, and we're looking for Nick Chubb for Georgia. I'm looking for Nick Chubb to have a great game. Well, the Hilltoppers of Western Kentucky are going to play Illinois. At Illinois, Western Kentucky is favored. The line is 8. The over-under seems a bit low at 52.5. But I'm going to go ahead and take the Hilltoppers over the Illini, the Fighting Illini of Illinois. So looking for the Hilltoppers with the upset over Illinois. The University of Texas El Paso. This game started out at UTEP was favored. Home game 56.5. They're going to be playing Rice. Rice University is the underdog. I go ahead and I probably take the Miners of UTEP. Probably take the under at 56.5. The Baylor Bears, they're going to be playing UTSA, the University of Texas, San Antonio. And after last week's embarrassment by Steve Buckshot Calvert of Liberty University, a religious school established in 1971 by one Jerry Falwell, I would think Baylor would want to redeem themselves this week. They're favored by 16.5. The over-under for UTSA is 59.5. I take the over, and I probably just hope that UTSA, University of Texas San Antonio, survives the game minus injury. I expect this to potentially be a severe blowout. If for nothing else, Baylor is frustrated, and they want to take some punishment out on UTSA, University of Texas San Antonio, for having lost to the aforementioned Liberty University Flames. Okay? All right. So we're moving on. The last few games here. The New Mexico, let's see. New Mexico and New Mexico State at New Mexico. Regional rivalry. This game is, the points have moved from 8.5 open to 7 now. Over-under is 71. I go ahead and take the over and New Mexico only because New Mexico, this is a home game. So good luck as New Mexico and New Mexico State battle each other out on Saturday, USC and Stanford. Now, for those of you that have been listening to the podcast and you know essentially that I'm a David Shaw fan, I'm going to throw out a stat for you right now just to let you know. I was discussing this with someone yesterday, I believe it was, against top 25 teams in his career. David Shaw is 18-8. And I'm expecting Clay Helton to have to pull out all the stops because the Stanford team, reflecting their coach, is very, very tough. And they want to bring, if I remember correctly, what was termed last year as intellectual brutality to their games. So, and they do that. I'm liking Stanford here. USC is favored by 6, but I'm not sold on Sam Darnold as the golden boy, self-anointed Heisman Trophy candidate. Stanford is the underdog by 6. I think this is going to be an upset. I take Stanford over USC, and the over-under is 54.5. I go ahead. I think it's going to be a tough dogfight. Probably go ahead and take the under at 54.5. The Idaho Vandals and the Running Rebels of UNLV. This is the team that got destroyed by Howard University unexpectedly. So UNLV's a definite underdog. The Idaho Vandals, the line has moved from 8 to 6.5. The over-under is 70.5. I'm thinking that the Vandals of Idaho are going to take this game. It'll probably be over that. I expect UNLV to put up a tough fight, but don't expect them to win. So take Idaho and the over at 70.5. The Oregon State Beavers, this line has moved as well. Started out at 1, now 2.5 as I speak. The over-under is 51.5. The Minnesota Golden Gophers come to Reser Stadium. I go ahead and give this game to Oregon State. I probably would move the line to 3 and wouldn't be surprised if it did move at that point. Go ahead and take the Oregon State Beavers at Reser Stadium in Corvallis. I probably take the over at 51.5. Utah at BYU, an interstate rivalry. The line is moved by 1. Started out at 1, went to 2. Brigham Young is the underdog. I take Utah and the over at 46.5 because this is a home game for Utah, and it should be BYU well represented as they always are in following their sports teams. Conference USA, Houston Cougars. Playing at Arizona, Pac-12. I go ahead and take the Arizona Wildcats in this game. The obvious distractions of timing and flooding and rescues and such should be enough, and usually is enough under any circumstances to cause Houston to be not focused, I guess you could say. 69.5 looks like almost a pick'em game. I take Arizona and the over at 69.5 because I expect Houston to be throwing the ball and doing what they can do to pile up yards and pile up points. At Martin Stadium, Washington State will be facing the Broncos of Boise State. Another intrastate rivalry. We've got Idaho and Washington State, which aren't too far from each other in the same Pacific Northwest region. The line started out at 9, moved to 10.5. The over-under is 57.5. I go ahead and take Luke Falk and Washington State over Boise State. Washington State had a great game last week, and they should do well this week against Boise State. And the only reason I'm picking them is they have a home game. 57.5 is the over-under. I take the over in this case at 57.5. And finally, on the college grid, Arizona State Sun Devils and the San Diego State Aztecs out of the Mountain West Conference. That's the Aztecs, of course. The Arizona State Sun Devils are favored by 3.5 now. They started out at 3. The over-under is 54.5. I'd probably go ahead and take Arizona State and the over at 54.5 for this week. So we've discussed New England, Kansas City. Not going to pick that game. Generally, as you may have heard on previous podcasts, I generally don't pick Thursday games because I believe the quality of football is not as great on Thursday as it normally is on Sunday. So we're going to move to the Sunday and Monday picks here as we close the podcast in the very near future here. Buffalo and the New York Jets. This is a home game for Buffalo. I think Buffalo has enough to win the game. The line was 5.5. Buffalo favored. The line has moved to 9. The over-under is 40. I probably go ahead and I take the over at 40. I just don't see the Jets having anything going for them, even though they traded Sheldon Richardson for Jermaine Kearse. Who do they have that's going to catch the ball for the New York Jets? It's possible that the New York Jets are just the northern version of the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's how bad they may be. Buffalo's an up-and-coming team. I'm just not sure if I understand the direction the Buffalo Bills are going. But then again, that's up to the folks in Western New York to figure out. But go ahead and take Buffalo and the over at 40 for this week. The Atlanta Falcons, defending NFC champions. The line started at 6, currently 6.5. The over-under is 48.5 at Chicago Sunday. The hapless Bears with Mike Glennon paying him a lot of money to do not much. That's to say, I don't think the Bears have enough offense, losing Alshon Jeffrey, among others. And obviously Matt Forte, I'm not sure that Chicago has enough. Take the over at 48.5. And I expect the Bears to lose that game. Atlanta is favored by 6 points. At Cincinnati, Baltimore is the underdog. Not sure about the status of Joe Flacco. Andy Dalton should have his prerequisite weapons ready to go. The line has moved from 1.5 to 3. The over-under is 42.5. I take Cincinnati and the over at 42.5. The Pittsburgh Steelers, this line started at 8.5, moved to 9.5, are at Cleveland, the hapless Hugh Jackson-led Cleveland Browns. Just released Brock Osweiler. Wow, say that 10 times fast and see where you get on that. Anyway, the situation with Pittsburgh and Cleveland, go ahead and take Pittsburgh. I expect Pittsburgh, Oakland, or New England to win the AFC based on performance. We'll see what happens there, but I'll put that out there right now for you, and we'll get back to that as the season rolls on. 46.5 is the over-under. I probably go ahead in Pittsburgh. I probably go ahead and take the under on this game. Cleveland may be game for about 2.5 quarters, but that may be it for Hugh Jackson. Expect Mike Tomlin's team, Pittsburgh, to open with a win. The Arizona Cardinals trying to have a bounce-back year at Detroit. Arizona is favored by 3. The over-under is 48. Matthew Stafford has incentive now, being the highest-paid quarterback at this time in the NFL, having just signed a new contract. I go ahead and I take Detroit in the home game against Arizona, as Arizona tries to resurrect themselves in the NFC West from a bad season. The Houston Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Not sure about this game, but I'll go ahead and give it to Houston. The line was 4. It's now 6. The over-under is 39.5. I did explain somewhat as to why I believe Jacksonville will be more of the same mediocrity right now. Go ahead and take Houston favored over Jacksonville on Sunday. Tampa Bay at Miami. This game has been definitely moved to Week 11 when both teams have byes, so we'll skip over that one. For obvious reasons, Hurricane Irma decided to interrupt the NFL's plans to have that game. At Tennessee, Marcus Mariota debuting against the Oakland Raiders. This line is moved from 1 to 1.5. The over-under is 50.5. I go ahead and I give the points. I probably go ahead and take Tennessee in a squeaker over Oakland. However, the thing I'll say about the Oakland Raiders right now, according to reports and according to all the information I have, the linebacker situation is not a strong one in Oakland. So if the Raiders do have a weakness, which is not on the offensive side of the ball, by the way, with Amari Cooper, Marshawn Lynch, Derek Carr, etc., etc. It's on the defensive side of the ball, and I want anybody who's viewing this game, and I think this will be on in the local area which I'm broadcasting from, the south coast of Southern California in Santa Barbara County. This will be a game that they will be televising, I should say. I would go ahead and take Tennessee and a squeaker over Oakland, only because this game is in Nashville and not in Oakland. Philadelphia in the nation's capital facing Washington. Just a couple comments here. I genuinely think that Carson Wentz is more of the prototype quarterback, and he may and likely will have a better year than one Dak Prescott. Let me rephrase that. I believe that Carson Wentz, being a better prototype quarterback as far as body type, as far as his ability to go ahead and throw the ball, will have a better year than Dak Prescott in his second year. What I'm saying, if Ezekiel Elliott is suspended 6 games, all bets are off as to where Dallas will be headed. But I do definitely have confidence in Carson Wentz. So Philadelphia at home. Now this line has moved from 2.5 to 1. The over-under is 47.5. Washington breaking in a new coach. Of course, that new coach, Sean McVay, he's in Los Angeles, and we'll get to the Rams in a moment. Take the Philadelphia Eagles and the over at 47.5. This game at Los Angeles, of course, Indianapolis coming in minus Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck not playing. Scott Tolzien starting for the Indianapolis Colts. The Rams favored by 3. This line has moved to 3.5. The over-under is 41.5. I go ahead and I take the under. I'm not sure that Jared Goff is ready to move into prime time. He better be, however, because Sean Mannion had, to be honest, to my mind, a more impressive preseason than Jared Goff. But of course, Jared Goff is the heir apparent franchise player, and they're paying him a lot of money, and they're not going to be paying him a lot of money to sit on the damn bench. Okay, so go ahead. I go ahead and I take the Rams, and I think 3 is about right. I wouldn't be surprised if this line moved by half a point down to 3, or perhaps by a point at 2.5. Lambeau Field, the Seattle Seahawks and the Green Bay Packers. The open was at 3. It's still currently at 3 as far as the spread. The underdog, Seattle Seahawks. I think Seattle is going to win this game with a slimmed-down Russell Wilson. A slimmed-down 245-pound Eddie Lacy making his debut back at Lambeau Field. So there's some nice storylines here. I don't believe Aaron Rodgers is going to be able to do against the defensive backfield of the Seattle Seahawks what he's done to so many teams in the past. I also have an issue with Green Bay's secondary. Green Bay's secondary was terrible last year. They need to fix that problem. The over-under here at Lambeau Field, Green Bay, Seattle, is 50.5. I go ahead and I take the over at 50.5, and I actually take the underdog Seattle Seahawks to win the game. The Carolina Panthers and the San Francisco Giants. John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan making their debut in San Francisco. The line opened at 4, currently 5.5. 47.5 is the over-under. I go ahead and I take the over here. And I believe Carolina will win the game. Hopefully, Christian McCaffrey, almost said his daddy, Ed McCaffrey, who I remember playing. Christian McCaffrey, and if Cam Newton is at least decent, not that he needs to throw for 300-plus yards, but 200 to 250 with a couple touchdowns is what I would expect from an anemic San Francisco 49er team. Not a fan of the 49ers. Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, and Dwight Clark was a long time ago. So I take Carolina and the over at 47.5. And the night game, Ezekiel Elliott, which I mentioned last night, won't belabor it, at Dallas, Sunday Night Football on NBC, the national broadcasting company in the United States. Check your local cable and satellite listings for time and channel in your area. Dallas, favored by 4 now. This line opened at 5.5, but the line moved essentially since Ezekiel Elliott is going to be permitted to play just because the NFL screwed up in their timing of this restraining order, and a decision has not been rendered. We will see, however, on Friday whether Ezekiel Elliott is going to have to serve his 6-game suspension, but it won't be until week 2 that commences. 47 is the over-under here. I'm not sure about Eli Manning or the health of Odell Beckham Jr. I probably go ahead and I take Dallas, but I'm not sure that I give the 4 points. I probably give maybe 3. And I would expect the Dallas Cowboys to prevail at home in week 1. And as I said, that'll be the Sunday night game, 5:30 p.m., 5:25 p.m., I believe, Pacific time, 8:25 in the Eastern time zone of the United States. In that case, Monday's games, doubleheader Monday, September 11th, and we want to pay homage to the victims of the 9/11 tragedy and the fall of the Twin Towers. We remember you, and we will definitely continue to keep you in our prayers as Monday approaches here. New Orleans is the underdog at Minnesota, minus Adrian Peterson. So Adrian Peterson of the New Orleans Saints gets to face his old team, the Vikings of Minnesota. The line is about 3. This is an accurate line. Vegas usually knows what they're doing. 48 is the over-under. I go ahead and I take Drew Brees and the New Orleans Saints over Minnesota. Now, Minnesota's favored by 3. But I believe just because of the high-powered offense of Sean Payton and Drew Brees, of course, he can throw the lights out of the ball, as we all know. Take New Orleans and the points, and take the over 48 for the first game of a Monday night football season opening doubleheader. The final game that I have for you tonight, as I close the podcast, the From the Bench podcast tonight at Denver. Los Angeles going to Denver. Anthony Lynn's debut. The over-under is 43. I'm not sure where Trevor Siemian fits into the mix right now. He's a young quarterback, but he's probably still prone to mistakes. Maybe not as many as last year, but still, he's on that learning curve. I don't see anything that San Diego has over and above Phillip Rivers. I go ahead and take Denver in Denver, and I probably take the over at 43. I do believe that Anthony Lynn will be going down to a loss in the battle for Los Angeles. For September 7th, 2017, this is the From the Bench podcast. This and any other podcast can be heard on Stitcher Radio, Libsyn, and AccessMediaGlobal.com by embed. Okay, I'll have this up as soon as I get off the air. You can obviously follow me on Twitter. Once again, MARK at Access Media. My name is Mark Janisch, MARKJANISCH. Well, we're definitely praying for those that are in the path of Hurricane Irma and those that have been afflicted in Houston by Hurricane Harvey and the floodwaters that resulted. For the From the Bench podcast, I'm your host, Mark Janisch. This has been the September 7th, 2017 edition of the podcast. A very pleasant good evening. We'll be back with you tomorrow night, Friday night, from Carpinteria, California, home of the From the Bench podcast. I'm Mark Janisch from the bench saying, God bless you and have a great evening. Thanks for listening.